Hello everybody and welcome to episode 85 of Short Viewer. Today we'll be going over Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. Now, this game is essentially just a remaster of the original Final Fantasy Tactics on PS1, because it has predominantly just the main story, just updated graphics and stuff like that. But yeah, so this story starts off with us learning about the 50 Years' War that was happened in the nation of Ivalice. Now, Ivalice had fought outside nations, and ultimately it did end up kind of losing the war, because the death of their first king, who was present during the beginning of the war, his death, and then the rise of another king, ultimately kind of led to the downfall, because he wasn't that great of a king, and then he ultimately ended up dying a couple of years after the war. And this left his infant son on the throne, and his regent mother, the queen, and this ultimately ended up leading to a schism between the, higher-ups, the aristocracy of Ivalice, with Duke Larg and Duke Gotana forming the two main factions, with Duke Larg forming the White Lions, and Duke Gotana forming the Black Lions. Now, each of these have dominion over two separate orders of knights. We have the Order of the Northern Sky, which is under the control of Larg, and we have the Order of the Southern Sky, which is under the control of Gotana. And we just kind of see this plays out, because this is the first part of Tactics really surrounding the Civil War, the Ivalician Civil War that is going on here. But yeah, so each of them are just trying to, put themselves into positions of regency so they can help and manipulate the king and essentially be the king themselves for a time, and possibly establish themselves to then overthrow the king. But yeah, we've seen it a million times throughout history and stuff like that, and in other stories. But yeah, so we see this, and we are introduced to the Beowulf family, who's the head of it is Barbaneth, and he has three predominant sons. One of them is illegitimate, while the other two are legitimate, those being Dicedog, who is the oldest, Zalbog, who is second oldest, and then we have Ramza, who is an illegitimate son, and then we have Alma, who's an illegitimate daughter by the same mother as Ramza's mother, so they're full siblings. Yeah, so we see this, and the story kind of starts off with the death of Barbaneth, and we see also as Ramza is training to be a knight. He is the main character, by the way, but we see Ramza is training to be a knight, and he has a close friend that family Beowulf took in, since I believe, both of their parents ended up dying because of, I believe it was a sickness or something like that. But yeah, they ended up getting a pair of children by the name of Delita and Tetra. And Delita becomes close friends with Ramza, and they grow up together and do all knight stuff. But yeah, so we see as Ramza grows up, and ultimately Barbaneth is on his deathbed. And as he's dying, he's just kind of telling his family what he wants and all that, and ultimately Barbaneth ends up dying. So then we see as also I don't know if I specifically mentioned it, but yeah, Beowulf is part of the White Lion side, and they support Duke Larg. Yeah, so we see this, and then we see as Dicedog and Zalbag end up sending off Ramza to hunt down the Corpse Brigade. The Corpse Brigade. Holy smokes! Yeah, they end up sending them to hunt them down to kind of quell this force, since they're kind of just a band of brigands who are just sowing revolutionary ideas throughout their land. So he sends Ramza and Delita to go and solve these problems. Yeah, so they send him off, and they end up just going about doing their thing, ultimately just kind of breaking down the Corpse Brigade slowly, bit by bit. And they ended up meeting this one other dude. I can't remember who he is. I know I hated him. He was some stuck-up dude who was from a lower-class family who had been, a higher-class family that had been disgraced, and he was trying to regain their honor, so he was all butt-munched to Dicedog and all that, so I did not like him. And, I mean, throughout this entire story, Delita ends up becoming my favorite character. But yeah, so we see this, and we see as they go along, and he obviously has some animosity towards Delita, because Delita is a lower-class citizen, while Ramza is upper-class, so he's trying to be in cahoots with Ramza the entire time. Yeah, so they ultimately end up going about this, and they do end up hunting down the head of the Corpse Brigade, who is Wiegraf. Now Wiegraf, I don't believe this. Okay, there was two people who, like I said, it took me a while to get through this game, so there's some gray areas. But here they ultimately end up hunting down the leadership of the Corpse Brigade, take out one of them, and then the other one actually captures. It's Wiegraf who captures Tetra, who is Delita's sister. And during this escapade, we see as the forces of the third squire, friend of Delita and Ramza, pulls up, and we see as Wiegraf escaping into this building. He's like, I'm going to blow it up. And he ultimately ends up getting shot by the other dude's forces. And during this, they don't not only shoot Wiegraf, but they also shoot Tetra. And Delita and Ramza are there to see this, and they're obviously dismayed by this and just frightened. And we see that Wiegraf actually ends up escaping into the building since he didn't get shot in a lethal wound. but teacher did. So yeah, so we see this, and then we ultimately see as there's kind of a following out. We see as Delita and Ramza end up fighting against the third guy, and both of them end up going their own paths after this battle. We see that Ramza ends up going to be a sellsword, and Delita goes to build his tail. But yeah, so we see as this goes along, and ultimately we end the first chapter off with a rescue. Is it a rescue? It's okay. No, this. What's his name? Crap. There's like this old guy knight dude. His name's Gafgarian. Yeah, so we see his Ramses in a group with Gafgarian, and they have been sent to help, I guess, guard? It wasn't Alma, it was Princess Ovelia. Princess Ovelia is a daughter of the royal family? I believe so. Yeah, a daughter. And so they send her, and that's why she wasn't placed as king, because she wasn't a male. But yeah, they've been sent to protect her and ward over her. But during this, they're, I guess, assuaged by rogue forces, and they end up taking Princess Ovelia from this like church she was staying in. So we end up teaming up with Ovelia's personal guard, Gafgarian, and Ramza. Obviously, they go and they attempt to reclaim Ovelia, and this sees them going throughout the land and all that stuff. And ultimately, they end up going to this cardinal's house. Now, this cardinal, I can't remember what his name was, but he wasn't a cardinal, he was a duke who was like a pious man. He was known for being pious, and he was going to assist in reclaiming Ovelia. Well, actually, no, he wasn't. They find Ovelia, get her again, and then they take her to this dude's place for safekeeping for the time being, but ultimately he ends up taking her hostage and attempting to sell her off to enemy forces. Not like sell, but like trade her off. But yeah, so we see this, and ultimately Ramses is like, okay, we gotta go stop this. So they go and stop it, and they fight this guy, and we actually learn here of the Zodiac Stones. Now, the Zodiac Stones are 12 mystical stones. There's actually 13, as we learn later on after in the post-game. But for the main story, there's 12 stones. And we see that the Zodiac Stones are powerful stones which elicit the either positive desires of a person or negative desires, depending on which one overrides this person's will when in possession of one. But actually with this Cardinal Dude, or Cardinal Duke, whatever you want to call him, we see as his dark desire ends up overwhelming him, and he becomes what was known as a Lokavi, which is essentially like a demon thing. But these stones actually date back to Saint Ajora. Now, Saint Ajora is essentially like the Jesus Christ of Final Fantasy. Like, there's so many, well, not Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy Tactics, because there's so many similarities between their stories. Like, we have a betrayer just like Judas, such as Germanique. Ajora was martyred just like Christ. And so we see a lot of similarities in there, but the problem with Ajora is that Ajora is more of a gray character. Ajora is not like Christ in that way, because there is a text by the name of like the scripture of Germanique or something like that, and you can actually read it, because there's 5 sets of reading materials in this game. I believe, 5 or 6. I believe it's 5 that you can read. They're just really cool. They're little interactive stories, and there's nothing much to them, but they're kind of cool to go about. But yeah, so we see this, and we learn that Ajora was not actually betrayed by Germanique, and Ajora had actually started to like turn to. We learned that Ajora was just not all that he was, or not all that she was hyped up to be, because we actually see it later on that I believe it's a woman. But yeah, so we see this, and we learn more about this, and we actually end up acquiring the scripture of Germanique while we're in the like area of the Cardinal and all that. But yeah, so we end up beating the Lokavi Cardinal, and this is kind of where the story swaps to us fighting against the faith, because there's the faith of Ivalice that follows Saint Ajora and all of that, essentially Christianity of the Final Fantasy Tactics world, but it's not like Christianity. It's like, it would be what the religion that descended from a martyr, so that's why I'm kind of comparing it like that. But yeah, so we see this, and they end up going along, and we progressively see as the workings of the church is actually coming to play. We see as betrayal starts to take place, we actually get to see as the church slowly gets to reclaim their stuff. They ultimately end up leading to more schism and the acquisition of the princess and prince by opposing groups. We see as the order of the the Black Lion ends up coming in possession of Ovelia, while the White Lion ends up coming in possession of Oranus, which is the little baby, I believe. And they each crown them king or queen of the lands. And we actually see throughout all this as Delita has slowly been working his way up. At first, he ended up becoming like a leader over like a minor knights group under the reign of the Black Lion Goltana. And now we see as he's slowly progressing his way up through betrayal and like manipulation. We actually see as he grows his relationship with Ovelia through all this as well, because he kind of convinces her that he doesn't want to just use her as a tool. He wants to be in a relationship with her. But yeah, so we see this, and we see as everything kind of starts to fall into place. But yeah, So this progresses along, and ultimately that's kind of what the focus of Chapter 3 is. There's the 4 main chapters in Final Fantasy Tactics, and we just kind of see that. And then ultimately we progress more into Chapter 4, and throughout all Chapter 3 we're fighting more Lucavi and stuff like that, fighting against the Order and all that, since Ramza has been labeled a heretic after the death of the Cardinal Dude. But, yeah, so we see Ramza has been labeled a heretic, so he's just going about fighting the Lucavi, fighting those with Zodiac Stones, and just going his way through that. Now, once we get to Chapter 4, we actually get to see a betrayal. We see that Dice Dog, who is the most loyal servant to Larg, who once again is the leader of the White Lions, he actually assassinates him and kills him. And through this, Larg actually determines that it was Dice Dog who killed his father based on the poison that he used, because we just kind of see this play out a little bit. I don't know why I said because there, but yeah. So we see this, and through this we ultimately see as Dice Dog comes in contact more closely, because the church did administer this poison and orchestrate it a little bit, and he's been under their control for a tad, and they end up giving him a Zodiac Stone. And during a conversation with a member of the church, we see as Zalbog actually comes to the realization after this that his father was indeed killed by Dostog. And we see as he requires a herbalist to end up going to his father's grave, where he sees that mushrooms have bloomed from his grave, which is an indicator of the specific type of poison. I think it's called poison fungus. It's called moss fungus. That's what moss fungus. And so we learn for a fact that Barbaneth was killed by Dice Dog, and Zalbog is obviously enraged by this, and he goes and confronts Dice Dog. But yeah, so we see that, and we end up seeing as more stuff goes along with Delita. We see as he progresses his way up, and eventually he actually ends up assassinating Goltana and using Orlando, who is one of the, I guess, kind of more important characters of the story. He was made believable to kill Goltana, even though he was one of Goltana's most loyal liege lords, because he was kind of supporting the idea of drawing away from the church a little bit more. Which ultimately led to Goltana imprisoning him, and when Delita saw the time was right, he ultimately ended up assassinating Goltana and then getting a double for Orlando, allowing the actual Orlando out of prison, finding the double for Orlando, and having it look like Orlando and Goltana killed each other. But this is actually Delita's way of going up the ranks once more. But yeah, so we see that, and ultimately we see as Ramza slowly grows closer to shutting down the works of the actual order, the church. But yeah, and we see ultimately as he ends up going against Dice Dog. He ends up fighting him. We end up fighting him in the Kavi form. We actually get to see as Zalbog is also sadly taken by Dice Dog, and we have to fight Zalbog and free his soul, and then we end up fighting Dice Dog. And then we just progress along, fight more church individuals until ultimately we end up going toward the final area where we have to go through and fight multiple higher up members of the church until we eventually face Fulmarv. Fulmarv's the higher up of the church. We actually see Fulmarv assassinate the High Confessor, who's essentially the Pope of the church, when the High Confessor had been controlling everything before, but he didn't have the power of a Zodiac Stone, while Fulmarv did, so he ends up using it. Well, not using it, he just ends up getting enough power to ultimately kill the High Confessor. But yeah, so that moves along, and then ultimately we end up fighting Fulmarv, get his Zodiac Stone, and then we head down to this abyssal area, and we face Ajora eventually, actually, because through all this, after fighting Wheatgraf, his main goal was, well, I actually forgot to mention this, even though this is an incredibly important plot point. The reason why Ramza is fighting the church is because they captured Alma, way back in Chapter 3, because after Ramza became a heretic, Alma joined along. But ultimately, at a battle against the church, she ended up getting captured, and Fulmarv realized that she was a suitable host to resurrect Ajoram. And this is why we see as Ramza ends up going to Dice Dog and all that, because he knows that his sister would likely be stored somewhere around there, but she ultimately isn't. She's taken away, and then she's taken to this area. And after Wheatgraf's defeated, we see, though, as he successfully unites and resurrects Ajora in Alma's body, but Alma's actually able to fight her and separate from Ajora. But however, Ajora is still powerful enough to come out and physically manifest. So then we end up fighting Ajora as kind of the final battle, and that is the last battle of Final Fantasy Tactics. But yeah, so we go into that, and then afterwards we see as everyone has presumed to be dead. We see a funeral for Ramza and Alma. However, while Oren, who is a kind of important side character, he's the son of Orlando, we see as he is at their funeral, he's I can't believe they're dead, but then they pass by and we see that they're alive. And then we get to see the rest of Delita's story. We see actually as Ovelia is crowned queen of Ivalice, and we see as he becomes king in her stead. Well, not in her stead, since they marry and form a relationship. But then after she learns of what Ramza and Alma actually did to save her and save the realm, she ends up betraying, well, not really betraying Delita, because, I mean, there was never really, like, any, like, unity between them. We see as she ends up killing Delita in revenge, and Delita stabs her back, so they have a joint suicide, like some Romeo and Juliet stuff, except there was no love there. But yeah, so we see that, and that is where the story concludes. Then we have a little bit of a in the story where we go to this place called Midlight's Deep, which is a really, like, this was like one of my favorite parts of the whole game. It's like a dungeon where each level you gotta fight all the enemies on there and find a hidden like escape routes in the dark, because I mean the things are completely black, like you can't even see the terrain, nothing. You can only see the enemies and you can see yourself. But yeah, that was just really fun. And ultimately at the end of that you end up finding a 13th Lucavian Zodiac Stone. You beat him, you get the 13th Zodiac Stone. But yeah, so I actually ended up platinuming this game, and holy smokes, the platinum for it was not rough, but it was long. Because there was this one trophy called Master of All Trades. I'm not even joking when I say I grinded for 3 days to get that. It took me every bit of 10 hours. Like, that obviously didn't do 3 days straight, but it took me every bit of 10 hours to get that one achievement. Because you had to get all the jobs for one character, on one character. But yeah, that grind was actually the only really long one. I was expecting the Rare Wares grind to be pretty long, but it wasn't at all. And I was expecting Midlight's Deep to be long, but it only took me like 2 hours to get through Midlight's Deep. But yeah, so that's kind of all there was. Like, story-wise, I'll kind of get into the gameplay a little bit. Now, the gameplay is average, like, tactical RPG gameplay. I don't like tactical RPGs when it comes to grinding, which you will have to do in Final Fantasy Tactics, because, like, the first part was hard for me, because I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't think about abilities or jobs or anything like that at first, and I was just going there, like, raw, like, and it did not work out at all for me. But ultimately, I, like figured it out and got going, and it was pretty easy through there. But you will have to grind some in this game. And grinding always sucks because you can't just, like, spam A. You actually have to put in thought to it, and you can't just, like, automatically do it. So that does kind of suck, but it is what it is. But yeah, so that's really just the gameplay. The job system is really enjoyable in this game because there's so many different jobs, so many different spells, abilities, and just crazy things you can do. And I really enjoyed that. I had, like, so much experimentation with the jobs that I had, and I mix and match so many, like, things. And this was probably, like, the game where I've actually, like, experimented with that stuff the most. Because most of the time, I get in one set class and I don't leave it. But this game, I was, like, experimenting, putting different things. It was like eating a bunch of food. Like, at a buffet, you're like, whoa, I need to try this, and this, and put it all together. And like, oh, it's masterful. But yeah, this was probably, like, my favorite job system that I've seen out of a Final Fantasy game. Now, that is not to say it was my favorite Final Fantasy game, because I do feel as if this game is slightly overrated. And I believe I believe that because I went into it with too high expectations. I did what I did with Final Fantasy VII when I first played it, and I went in with way too high of expectations, and I was like, crap, I got a little bit disappointed. This game disappointed me a little bit. However, I did like the story. I liked the story. I'm not a massive fan of Final Fantasy VII. I enjoy the world and all that, but, like, honestly, I preferred playing Crisis Core more than actual, like, I love RPGs, but I just wasn't big on the Final Fantasy VII RPG. Honestly, I'd say I probably like Final Fantasy IV more than the 7, but it's just, I prefer a fantasy world rather than, like, a cyberpunk-ish world. But I did also really love, like, the intrigue of Final Fantasy VII, like, and just the questions it made me see. But, like, it wasn't one of my favorite Final Fantasies. Like, it's up there, obviously, but it's not, like, number one. Final Fantasy 16 will always be number one, because it did a fantasy world perfectly. And Final Fantasy Tactics did a great fantasy world too. I love the political intrigue of it. I just wish there was a little bit more complexity to it. Like, yes, there was very complex, there was a lot of stuff going on, but once you kind of progressed into the story, it was just Rams was fighting the church, and there wasn't that much. I would have really liked to see more of the stuff between Goltana and Larg, but it is what it is. And, like, generally, the only big reason why I didn't like the story was actually the voice acting. I played Ivalice. You can either play the original or Ivalice, and I don't know if there's voice acting in the original, that, like, on the PS1, but I did not like the voice acting in Ivalice Chronicles at all. I did like it. I did not like Ramza, and Ramza is the one you gotta listen to the most, because bro's the main character, and I hated his voice. And I hated how, like, during battles, they just randomly stop you, and you have to go through dialogue. I prefer if they would have done it beforehand, or, like, in cutscenes before battles or after battles, instead of just stopping you midway, talking, and then going back to the battle, because it really just kills, like, the suspense and the flow of things. So I wasn't massive on that, and that's kind of one of the big reasons why I didn't completely enjoy the game to the level I believe I could have. Like I said, I enjoyed the story, just wish it was a little, like, more fleshed out, and I wish they hadn't done those little, like, stupid, like, intercessions between battles and within battles, because I just feel like that really killed the pacing and, like, hype for me. But yeah, that's kind of the big complaint I have about it. I mean, besides the grinding and, well, not the grinding, but like the way you have to grind. But yeah, I did really enjoy the music of it. You'll get the music absolutely stuck in your head because you'll be listening to it a lot. But I mean, there is a lot of varying soundtracks for it, and like there's a bunch of like the side content I really did enjoy with like the errands. The errands that are just kind of not really much. It's still fun to read like the little stories behind them because I read literally every entry in this entire game. So, but I didn't read all of the 5 reading sources, but I like the Chronicle stuff. I did read all of that. And it's really fun to like pick up all of those lore and see as each of the little entries update and all of that. So it was really enjoyable. I did like the depth of it. Yeah, and let me think. Midlight's Deep, I loved it. Like I said, it's probably my favorite part in like the entire game, like gameplay wise, because it was so new and so much fun. But yeah, I love that. I love the music. Side content. There wasn't like a lot of side content, but like the trophies were the biggest thing, and the trophies were pretty fun to grind for, I gotta admit. And like there is one side quest. I forgot about the Gouge Town, the Gouge Clock Towns are Goug. I'm gonna call it Gouge. But that side quest is really fun because you actually like get to interact with characters from other realms. You find this thing called Construct 7 and Construct 8. You end up like recruiting them to the team and all that, and well, you actually destroy 7, you save 8, and you ultimately end up summoning Cloud into the world, like Cloud Strife into the Final Fantasy Tactics world by using a Zodiac Stone or like some ancient device. And he ends up coming in, and you see as you pass through a town, and he sees this girl who he presumes to be, well, I don't believe her name is actually Aerith. Yeah, her name is actually Aerith in this game, or Eris. Both of them are valid in my opinion. But yeah, so we see Eris/Aerith, and it's not his world's one, but it looks like her exactly, and that's her name in the Tactics world. We see is we fought a little battle to save her and all that stuff. So it was really cool, and she was a flower seller and everything. So it was really cool, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, like I said, this game was good, had its flaws. It was overrated in my opinion. I'd give it a good solid. I enjoyed it. I'd say 6.5 out of 10. It just wasn't absolutely my thing. I do prefer like the mechanics, at least like tactics wise, of Fire Emblem more. But it was a very good entry for like one of the, I believe it might be the only tactics entry in Final Fantasy. I don't know for certain. I don't know all the side games. I know like Crystal Chronicles. I know this, like Dirge of Cerberus and the random crap like that, but like nothing much deep into Final Fantasy Tactics. Not Final Fantasy Tactics, but like Final Fantasy side games. But yeah, I mean, that's all I really have to say about Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. Like I said, the Platinum, which I did get, was a relatively fun Platinum to get, and it wasn't hard, really. It was just kind of tedious on like the Master of All Trades one. And yeah, like I said, that's all I really have to say about that. That's all I really have for episode 85 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.